Welcome back. I'm Amanda Riegel, CEO of Excelle. We are a women's leadership network focusing on empowering women and being a safe space where they can find answers to really hard questions. You know, as you climb the ladder, it feels lonelier and lonelier about who you can ask the candid questions that you just don't know. Fortunately, we are here with Pete Commons, who is an incredible lawyer and friend to many Excelle women, and has really been much more than a friend. Been stewarding them through some difficult transitions, and given them really empowering advice. So thank you, Pete, for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Amanda. A real privilege. Thanks.
So we've had a couple conversations already about, specific transitioning for heads of school, thinking about negotiating contracts. Today, we're just going to sort of zoom out. And the thought I had in my head was, okay, you're someone who's in a situation and says, oh, great. How do I know if I need a lawyer in this situation? And so that's sort of the theme. I want Pete to just dive in and give us some real practical advice to how to navigate legal situations. I think the prevailing feeling is law is expensive. Schools are trying to manage budgets. And so do we really need to go to a lawyer? Do I need to hire it on my own? Should my school hire it? So that's the context through which we'll think about these questions.
All right, sounds great.
Great. Just to start, how do you know if you even need a lawyer given the situation? What should you consider are like a checklist, like, oh my gosh, that's definitely not something that I can answer myself. How do we know if we need a legal professional?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's really hard to say, right? It's really hard, I think, for people to say to themselves, "Oh, I know I need counsel for this." But I think I can give you some tips that might be helpful. So first of all, if you're going to engage a lawyer, if you think you might need a lawyer, the money that you spend on a lawyer before you do something tends to be much less and give you far more returns than the money that you spend after you do something. So if you're going to terminate an employee, talk to the lawyer before you terminate the employee, not after you terminate the employee. If you're going to sign a contract, talk to the lawyer before you sign the contract or agree to, say, compensation terms rather than after, because you can put a lot of effort and a lot of money behind a mistake that you've made, and the mistake is going to continue to be there. And lawyers are pretty good. Most lawyers are pretty good at anticipating problems around actions that have not yet happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you were going to terminate an employee, you might spend some time with the lawyer thinking about whether or not you have the file that can support that termination and what that file looks like and who's going to ask for it and what the likely response could be. And it might not all be legal. It might be that a board chair would ask to see a file on an employee that you decided to terminate and ask why you did that. There are, I think, I think planning can help.
Great.
Another tip on when you need a lawyer. Anytime someone else says to you, parent, faculty member, says to you, my lawyer told me this. If it's a legal conversation, if they're telling you what their lawyer said, perhaps their lawyer should be talking to your lawyer. Now, you might decide not to do that, but it's an easy off-ramp for a conversation that might be risky for you to have. And I think at momentous moments, and you can sometimes feel a momentous moment, right? Those are places where it might be worth spending half an hour on the phone with your lawyer.
What if I'm imagining situations in this climate where in independent schools, administrators, not just heads of school, but it could be a lower school head, it could be all kinds of roles, would be in meetings with parents and the situation escalates. How do you know if you should pause the conversation, you should have someone else in the room? Are there, some scenarios that would be like an important checklist that you could share with us?
Well, I mean, the potential situations are broad, right? So I'm not sure that I have a checklist, but I think I can say that something you and I have talked about before, Amanda, you can decline to have a particular conversation,
Mm,
right? Somebody says you must do X, Y, and Z because this is the rule. What do you have to say about that? Your response can be, I'm not prepared to talk about that, but we can talk about these other things that your child is doing in class or in school that might
mhm,
be entirely within the realm of reasonable conversation.
mhm.
I think that having the confidence to redirect conversations is a skill, and one that particularly heads would be well served to practice.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure I answered your question
I think you
satisfactorily.
did. Well, your advice would be less is more. If you think you're gonna sort of go out on a limb, just decline to answer or redirect in another area, because getting into, I guess I'm thinking about situations where if you believe a parent is angling for something and they're sort of leading you down this path and there's some emotion behind it, that should be a warning flag.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think we're going to be held accountable for the things that we say.
Hmm.
So be careful what you say. And
Hmm.
and the last thing is people, if you let them, and sometimes if you don't, will hear what they want to hear. And
That's
so
true.
you might feel like you are being very careful in the way that you're answering, but answering the question in sort of a permissive way might lead a parent or an employee to have a totally different take on what you said than what you intended and what another objective, reasonable person would have heard.
Hmm. That's making me think. It reminds me of what you said before you have a momentous occasion, consult a lawyer. It feels like you should have a colleague there with you, um, even just to provide support so that you um, can have another witness and to lean on, um, and maybe check you if you're going down a particular path that wouldn't be helpful to you.
And I think that's generally wise. I mean, there might be exceptions to that. There might be circumstances where the information is really confidential and sharing it among a broader group is problematic. But I would say most of the time you're exactly right.
And if you feel like it's not going well, it's always a good idea to sort of pause the conversation and either get someone else to come in or say, perhaps we should continue this when we have more time to reflect. Would you advise pausing?
I think so. Uh I think that's a great piece of advice. And I think that it's more okay than most people feel like when they're in the flow of a meeting or a conversation to just say, I think we should pause this conversation and I'm available at these other times and we can restart.
Hmm.
And that is far better than saying something that you shouldn't say, or sharing information that you shouldn't share.
Hmm. I think it reminds me that centering, at least in independent schools, the conversation on children and students
Mm.
is always a good way to do that. And especially when conversations get into these other areas that might not actually be very close to the student's best interests or what the original conversation was planned to be.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. Discipline around process helps.
Mm, for sure. Um, So, if someone is just sort of at the start of trying to find legal services,
Mm.
what factors are important to think about?
Well, I'm sure that clients think about cost. I think that's relevant.
Mhm.
Um, But I would say that as I've proceeded through my career, I think there are like three parts to the quality of legal advice. Um, one, and maybe the most important, is effort. Is the lawyer really going to try?
Mm.
And do they care? That's part of effort for me. The second, and and probably the second most important thing, is experience. Have they done this before? Have
Mhm.
they seen these issues? Because I can tell you in my particular practice, the quality of my advice, the 10th time I've done something,
Mm.
the polish on the advice, and the success rate of the advice that I give in practice is much higher than the first time. Um, and then I think the third part is, do they have the skills? You know, those are the three things that you're trying to put together. And if you put those things together, you're going to have good advice and your outcomes are going to be probably as good as you could reasonably expect. But if there's no experience or no effort or no skills, that's a real problem.
How do you gauge effort? I think that's a really interesting topic. And I guess indicators for me would be responsiveness, but what's realistic to expect in a
Mm.
certain situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think responsiveness is used as a metric for effort. And, what else is there? I understand why it's used. I also think that if your lawyer is good, they're going to be busy.
Hmm.
And that means that sometimes you need to wait. I mean, I think so. My mother and father were lawyers, and I was raised in a household with lawyers. And the way they used to practice, they had long periods of time to think about an issue because they would get a letter, and the letter would come in, and they would put it on their desk and they would think about it and then they would go do something else and then they would come back and then they would write a draft and then they would set it aside and then they'd pick up the draft, they'd edit the draft and then they'd mail it out. And the sort of, we all do that now in 5 minutes or less, right? Constantly. And in most of your correspondence, probably the consequences of a misstep there aren't that big. In your legal correspondence, the way that you say stuff really matters. So I don't know that I think responsiveness is fair, although I understand why it's used. I don't think it's probably entirely appropriate. Although a couple of days being told when you can expect something and then having the lawyer live up to that, I think those are fair. I think you have to get a sense. You have to use your judgment. Is this person really with me? Are they
Hmm.
really thinking about this?
Hmm.
I had a situation where I was lawyer shopping with a client for a personal injury lawyer. We met with a lawyer. He wouldn't stop eating potato chips. Like, we're not working with that person. Another person, you go to their office. This was a while ago, but we went to their office and we just waited, you
Oh,
know? And then they came in and you could hear them on the phone. Then they came in and then I think, I think that respecting your problem and respecting your time is uh, probably as good a metric as you're going to get. And then there's the human factor. Do you like them? Do you trust them? Do you think they care?
and you're making me think that if you feel like you're a priority, you are. That all of those factors will lead you to feel, is this person going to go to bat for me and has my best interest in mind? I think you're right. It's this collection of data and then trust your instincts about it.
Actually, I tell my kids all the time, everybody can tell if you're trying. And I really think that's true. I think if you're really trying, people can feel it.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. Um, all right. So I'm asking you to peel back the curtain. Do you have tips on how to use counsel efficiently? Everyone is worried about huge lawyer fees and, will this be worth my time? So, what is your advice
Hmm.
broadly?
Well, well, I do think keeping your lawyer current on your situation is valuable. But there are times when the lawyer should be informed, and there are times when you might want to compress the correspondence into a single piece of correspondence.
Okay.
Because um, if you're writing a number of emails and it's not a matter that is really time sensitive or consequential, you're probably running up fees that you don't need to run up. In my world, I spend a lot of time managing my calendar. And actually, I don't feel like that's good time. And I don't think that I think the clients are trying to be respectful. Like, when can I call you? They
Mm-hmm.
should just call me. Some of the time they should just call me. It depends on the nature of the conversation that you want to have. But if you have a question, call. And if I can't pick up, I won't, and I'll call you back. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll have a conversation sort of in a time frame that is humane. Um, I think that if I were a client, I would try to understand the way that my lawyer is engaging with my project.
Mm-hmm.
And I would try to focus their attention on my questions at the time that they're engaged in my project. So if I'm working on a contract and I've told someone, I'm going to work on this in the next day or two, that's when
Yeah.
I would call with my questions. Or I would say, as soon as you're done, could you give me a call so we could talk it through?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I'm already looking at their contract, I'd be very happy at the end of that work to pick up the phone and talk about it right then, rather
Yep.
than reopening the issue uh, a couple of days later and having to go back and relearn all those ideas that I had that
Yep.
hopefully I wrote down, but it's going to take a little effort. Those
Yep.
are those are my general thoughts. I also think it's fair to ask what the lawyer thinks something is going to cost.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that question when I get it. And I think that clients should understand that the lawyer often doesn't know. So they should give you what they can
Mm-hmm.
about total costs and budget, but they don't know how the negotiation is going to go either, how demanding you're going to be, how demanding the other party's going to be, what uh, completely unexpected issues are going to arise. We don't really know either.
On that note, is it fair to have a sort of a check-in? So where are we cost-wise in what we projected?
So yes, to solve that, lawyers often bill monthly. I actually bill every 2 weeks. And it's not because I'm trying to get paid every 2 weeks. It's because I feel like the more often they get a bill, the better they'll understand where we are in the work
Mm-hmm.
that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they can ask for a bill anytime. And that's something that I might do. If I'd been on the phone a lot with my lawyer over the last few days, I might say, hey, could you send me a bill for the last week or so that I just know where we are?
Yep.
And I would hope everybody would do that.
That's a really good advice. Um, so a lot of these women are sifting through emails, tons of emails. Is it quicker and more efficient for them to pick up the phone and not have to follow an email chain? Is that something lawyers generally or you prefer?
Well, I, I probably shouldn't speak for all lawyers. Um,
Not fair of me to ask you.
but but what I can tell you is the volume of information that's shared in a phone call is just much, much higher
Mhm.
than in an email. And the email is going to take longer because the way that we write, at least the way that I want to write crisply and cleanly and say the things that I mean to say and have my punctuation right and my name spelling right and everything sort of dotted and crossed.
Yep.
In a conversation, there's just much more information you can follow. You can say, hold on, just the way we're having, right? Hold on that point. Let's talk
Yep.
about that a little more because that's an
Mhm.
area where I'd like more information.
Yep.
Or I got that. We can move on. You don't need to
Okay.
spend 15 minutes writing me a paragraph on something that I already know,
Yep.
right?
Yep. That's great advice. Anything else that we haven't covered in just sort of generally how you dance with a lawyer?
Well, I guess I would just come back and say, I think the most important thing that I would want in a lawyer is someone who cares. And if they care, they're going to try. And if they're trying, they're doing the best they can. You just don't want someone who's not trying very hard.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the worst. And that's not just legal services. That's like everything, you know? So I don't know. That would be my first priority.
That's helpful. And I think that the word earnest is coming to mind for me, and that's something that's hard to fake. And so if someone is engaging and they don't feel that the person is present or earnest or is following up or gives permission to stumble. I mean, we're not going to get everything right, but can we call each other on it and transparently say, ooh, that's not exactly where I was headed. That's really important. That makes me think, when you have made a mistake or said something wrong that you fear has a legal implication, should you call your lawyer right away? Like, what should
Yeah. Well, I don't know about right away, but you should call your lawyer before you say you're sorry. In a professional capacity, you should call your lawyer.
Why is that?
You get in a car accident before you say you're sorry, you should probably call your lawyer. There are all these human things that we teach our children and we say we believe in, but unfortunately, the legal system is heartless and doesn't always reward the best in us. And so having a conversation with someone who understands that system before you speak is usually a good idea.
I think that's great advice. And I'm thinking of these women who are very pastoral leaders, and I'm reminded that you can express care and concern in a situation without saying you're sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really wise advice. Yeah, I believe that.
Pete, this has been really fun. We've had quite a day, and I just thank you so much for sharing this time with us.
It was fun, Amanda. Thanks for doing it with me, and